Hello, I'm Anthony Gorhan, and in this video I'm going to continue the discussion of grammar, English grammar particularly, by looking at the verb phrase in English. Well, what's in a verb? What's in a verb phrase? There are four characteristics of a verb phrase, and the most fundamental is tense. And then there's aspect, mood, and finally voice. And these four characteristics combine and relate to each other within the verb phrase to help construct meaning. But they are, each in their way, often misunderstood and misrepresented. So I'd like to take each one in turn. Let's look at tense, and particularly how it relates to time. Now, the first thing to know about tense is that it's primarily a morphological phenomenon. That is to say, that tense is simply a means through which we signal something in the form of the verb itself. Now, tense is only incidentally chronological. Something may be in past tense in terms of its morphology, but it doesn't necessarily refer to past time. Having said that, tense in English can tell us very broadly that something happens or something happened. Interestingly, it can't tell us anything about the future because there is no morphological change to a verb itself in English that indicates future tense. There are in other languages, but not in English. So in that sense, the Sex Pistols were right when they said no future for you. And this basically means that there are only, in fact, two tenses in English. There's present tense and there's past tense. Anything else, anyone who says that there are 5, 7, 13 tenses in English simply doesn't understand what tense means. Now, we use present tense to express facts, states, or general routines which are not delimited to or delimited around the moment of speaking or another point of reference. Examples of this are, I love you, she doesn't live here anymore, or the plane leaves in 5 minutes. Now the last one here is particularly interesting because it's present tense, the plane leaves, but it's not related to present time. It's related to future time. So here we can see very nicely the lack of connection, the lack of essential connection between time and tense in English. Now we typically use past tense, signalled by adding ed very often to regular verbs or using an alternative spelling often for irregular verbs, to describe facts, states, or discrete actions which either occurred or were the case before the moment of speaking, or which we wish to distance from that moment for some often social reason. For example, I hated school, talking about a fact in the past. I lived in London for almost 30 years. The same happens to be talking about the past time and is in past tense. But here it starts to get slightly cloudier. I wanted to ask you about that. Wanted, past tense, but clearly related to present time, now. And even more extremely, did you need anything else, sir? Or were you looking for anything in particular in a shop? These final examples are in past tense, not to refer to past time, but to gain social distance. Now, an interesting little grammar fact about present and past tense. According to the Longman Grammar of English, a full 80% of all spoken and written English is in what are commonly described as present simple or past simple tense. That's to say, she works, I worked. 80% of everything that's said or written can be done with those two structures. Now, you wouldn't come to that conclusion if you looked at published courseware, which provides at least equal coverage in terms of paper in course books to such relatively weak structures as third conditional, past perfect continuous, and all kinds of other bits and pieces. So there seems to be an extreme disbalance between the relative usefulness through frequency of a structure and the amount of time through courseware that learners are implicitly encouraged and explicitly encouraged to spend time studying. Now, in the third video in this series, I'd like to talk about aspect, particularly the two aspects of English, progressive or continuous aspect and perfect aspect. And after that, we'll be talking about mood and voice. So see you in the next installment.